Good evening and welcome to Worldview, the international affairs show that brings you the news and views that other networks can't or won't tell you about. I'm Alan Mendoza. Our show tonight, National and International Security Policy, is an unquiet world the correct formula? Now, last week, the Conservative Party's National and International Security Policy Group launched its long-awaited final report, An Unquiet World. Anchored by the redoubtable Dame Pauline Neville-Jones, a former senior Foreign Office official, the report lambasted the government for its record, stating that the UK is ill-provided for disaster management in the event of a national emergency. Ministers were also criticised for damaging Britain's international reputation through naive state-building, undermining home security through treatment of ethnic minorities as groups, not individuals, and overstretching our armed forces. Prime Minister Gordon Brown's response, a firm declaration in Washington, D.C. on how he views terrorism, the announcement of new counter-terrorism measures, and a diplomatic coup to insert a robust UN force into Darfur. So, given this trading of blows, have the Conservatives now stolen the initiative on security matters, where opinion polls have previously shown them to lack credibility, or does a government maintain the whip hand? And what are the likely battlegrounds on national and international security policy, where we will see major clashes for the rest of this Parliament? Well, joining me tonight in the Worldview studio to discuss this topic are the Director of the Centre for Social Cohesion, Douglas Murray, Garvin Walsh of the Conservative Party International Security Group, and Dr. Dan Plesh, the Director of the Centre for International Studies and Diplomacy at SOAS. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me in this heightened time of party trading on sort of security issues. It seems to be the current vogue thing. Garvin, let's start with you, as you've played a major part in writing this report and participating in the deliberations and so on and so forth. Do you feel, let's just start, that the Conservatives have actually recovered credibility now on security issues? A recent poll pointed out that people believed that Labour were preferable to the Conservatives on 52 to 20% on security matters. Does this report address that? Do you think the tide has turned?
Yes, I think this report does, and what it sets out a new vision for security policy that has two main aspects. One, taking domestic and foreign security policy together instead of separately, because of the way the world is now, and everything that it gets known as by shorthand as globalization. You can no longer have these things in separate little boxes. And secondly, it's our overall approach is different from the government's, where the government has seemed to engage in a certain amount of military confrontation abroad and appeasement at home when it's come to dealing with terrorism. We have instead we have a different set of policies that has that abroad we.
Presumably you're not going to appease abroad.
No,
is that what you're suggesting?
We're not going to appease abroad. In dealing with terrorism, sometimes military force is needed, but we need to be much more careful about how we use it.
Okay, yes, so that's a clear differentiation in terms of what you would like to see between what the government thinks and you do. Well, Douglas, do you feel the government's been doing a bad job both internationally and domestically?
Not a bad job, no. There are certainly quibbles to be made, and one of the good things, as far as I can see about this report, is that it's not by any means a wholesale sort of attack on government policy, and I think the Conservative Party actually ought to be congratulated for being relatively non-partisan in the way it's approached this. I mean, it seems to sort of acknowledge where the government has got things right and acknowledges where it hasn't. So I think it's more constructive than I was perhaps anticipating it would be.
And where would you quibble with the government's then approach on matters?
Domestically.
Do you share Garvin's categorisation of appeasement, for example?
To an extent, yes. Look, I mean, one of the things which this report notes, which is a genuine improvement and quite a milestone for this country anyway, is making it very clear that you shouldn't be treating, in particular, Muslim communities within Britain purely as a religious group. This is a very important thing which the government has so far in this country got wrong. The Labour government's got fantastically wrong. We're approaching people through the mosque, approaching people through their alleged religious leaders, who don't represent a significant swathe of Muslims in this country. And the government, by treating them purely as a religious group and treating them only as a group which have religious leaders, has made a great mistake here, and actually I think encouraged extremism or encouraged fundamentalism. And if the followings of this report are followed, I think we'd genuinely be in a better place.
Okay, well, we'll come back to the sort of specific recommendations. Just, Dan, to get your view on the overview. I mean, do you share the broad thrust, if you like, of the recommendations or the principles?
Well, to be frank, I mean, it's hard to say this is, like Harry Potter, you described it as long-awaited. There was scarcely a queue outside the office for it. And if you look at it, the actual recommendations come down to suggesting that various new headquarters staffs and review processes be set up in government, mere bureaucracy. Now, beyond that, there's a lot of fluff, frankly, about saying we don't like nation building, for example, the way it's carried out. And I think that the huge 800-pound gorilla is the disastrous war in Iraq, and beyond that, the fact that we now find ourselves, NATO and the US, sucked into two unwinnable ground wars in Asia, in breach of every strategic premise, with no prospect of them being over, an administration in Washington which, by all accounts, is teetering on launching a new war with Iran, and a return to unnecessary confrontation with Russia, and the prospect again of a nuclear-armed confrontation, and indeed nuclear war by accident with Russia. These are the big looming issues out there. Now, when it comes to the question of community cohesion and fundamentalism, let's be clear, this isn't just about Muslim fundamentalism. In all the world's religions, we have a fundamentalist problem. We have, in America, a big problem of religious fundamentalism. We have American generals telling their troops to go off and do God's work.
One case where that happened.
Well, I interrupt you. Let me just wrap up. We have American celebrity authors, not ostracized or criticized by politics, like Ann Coulter, who write about conquering the Islamic. We find ourselves in the idiotic situation where the coalition is allowing groups of Korean Christians to go about trying to do God's work in the heart of Afghanistan. Now, what more idiotic policy can you pursue? A, if you want to have people who aren't going to get themselves kidnapped, which would seem to be a daft thing in the first place, and secondly, to try to convince people you're not about to carry out a crusade when you're sending Christian missionaries into the heart of their country. I can see you're seething.
Yes,
well,
go on.
Look, first of all, let's get it straight. Ann Coulter doesn't speak for anyone in the American government or anyone in the American administration.
I didn't say she did. I said that she's lauded on the circular, not disavowed.
No. Look, she is disavowed. You will not find members of the administration who will back what Ann Coulter is saying, and there's a good reason, which is they recognise that she is a popular crackpot. That does not mean she speaks to the American administration, or indeed for the American people. She's a popular fool. Look, it is not official government policy in America or in Britain to send waves of Korean missionaries into Afghanistan. It is something that has happened, but is not policy of the US government. It is not the policy of the US government to evangelize in Afghanistan or Iraq. We'd know if it were. You talk about crusade.
You think there is a policy?
You talk about crusade.
I haven't noticed much of a policy.
Slip of the tongue of George Bush, a stupid and regrettable slip of the tongue.
Do you think he regrets it?
I think he does, very much so. And look, I mean, there's one really easy way to not deal with the big problem of our time, by which, of course, I mean Islamist fundamentalism. There's one big problem. There's one big way of skirting around the issue, and that is to pretend that all religions have fundamentalists and all fundamentalisms are the same, and we have Bible Belt Christians in America. Well, look, when a Christian does do something reprehensible, when they pretend to do so in the name of God, they do not get the backing, financial or otherwise, of the Western
Well, we've got 500,000 dead in Iraq right now. There's more than Al-Qaeda can dream of.
Not done in the name of God, not done in the name of America, not done because America are killing those people.
Largely done in the name of God.
Done in the name, I think you'll find, of Allah, by people who kill their co-religionists. Maybe to spite America, but nevertheless it's them that's murdering their co-religionists.
The vast majority of deaths in Iraq are either caused by the collapse of healthcare or mostly according to all the statistics, as a result of coalition military action.
Let us break this up for 1 minute.
Talk to the doctors.
Let's hit it back to the report, though, to Dan's initial point, which is, it's true, isn't it, though, that if you like, the £800 gorilla are the campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq. David Cameron today, I think, I noticed, has announced, we've got to win the war in Afghanistan, we'll continue there. Bit sort of, more hazy on the whole Iraq issue, not quite sure where the Conservatives necessarily stand on that these days. Why is the report really not focused on those major campaigns?
I think the report has focused on Afghanistan and Iraq. Our criticism of the government has been that they made many mistakes in the Iraq campaign, but the Conservative Party supported the campaign and continues to support the campaign.
Would you support military action against Iran? Liam Fox said he's prepared to support the use of nuclear weapons against Iran. Are you prepared to support that? All the Republican candidates for the presidency have said on television that they would support the use of nuclear weapons against Iran to prevent it getting nuclear weapons. Would you?
We hope that we can manage a diplomatic solution to the problem.
But all this wimpy UNery is not going to get anywhere, is it? Who thinks the UN and the EU are going to get a solution?
We don't think it's right to take anything off the table for negotiations.
So do you think that the UN and the EU are capable of getting the Ayatollahs to give up the bomb?
It's now a united transatlantic effort to try and persuade the Iranians to give up.
So do you think they're going to give it up?
Let him finish the points, as you quite rightly said, yes. Well, we'll come on to the Iran issue in a moment, perhaps, and look at it. I just want to focus, though, just to have a little look at some more of the specifics here in terms of what's going on. It seems that the Conservative Party's approach can be broadly classified, if you like, Douglas is more libertarian in action, and Labour perhaps a bit more on the authoritarian side, particularly when it comes to measures looking at domestic security. Now, let's look, for example, at detention of suspects without charge, where, of course, there have been hints the government would like to increase the days that people can be held from 28 to maybe 56 has been canvassed as an option. The Conservatives have come out absolutely against that, as have the Liberal Democrats, saying that his against civil liberties doesn't serve any purpose. Again, the whole ID cards issue as well has fallen on very similar paths along that way. I mean, can we see this divide, and which of those approaches strikes you as being the more effective in dealing with terrorism?
I don't think it's. I mean, you could say that the Conservative Party is sort of outflanking Labour on this issue at the moment. I mean, it's seen if it keeps doing this as the sort of more liberal party on these issues, and anti-authoritarian measures, as you say, like ID cards and like 90 days. I think this isn't actually a problem of the Conservative Party. It's a problem of the Labour Party not making its case very well. The Labour government, if it does want to extend the periods of detention without trial, really does have to make a much better case for why it's needed. In the absence of that case being made, of course, the Conservative Party is going to be opposed to it. I thought that was sort of evident.
Right. Dan, I mean, your view on these domestic measures? I mean, Brown's announced also this new beefed-up border
well,
patrol
we seem to have forgotten about Ireland, the disaster of internment without trial. The fact that if you look at successful British imperial policing and counterinsurgency, the sine qua non are to maintain the moral high ground, Guantanamo, and Belmarsh, and to strictly adhere to the rule of law. These are essentials which are being squandered with the development of longer and longer periods of detention. And they aren't effective. That's the problem with them. It just doesn't work. It makes the situation far worse.
Well, I mean, I don't think you can say they don't work. I mean, there hasn't been another attack on the American homeland since 2001, so it could very easily be argued that Guantanamo has worked.
Interesting point. Now, Garvin, let's again look at the essence of this sort of communities approach we were looking at earlier. Douglas briefly mentioned, obviously, the approach within treating communities as individuals rather than groups. Could you perhaps unpick that? I mean, I'm a bit puzzled by that whole terminology. It seems a bit gobbledygook to me, a nice, friendly thing to say, but what does it actually mean? Douglas seems to think